Welcome to the February edition of Book Choice here on Fine Music Radio. I'm your host, Paige Nick, and for the next hour, we'll be bringing you a whole lot of reviews of some great new books and some older books, as well as interviews with authors that I really think you're going to love, all sponsored by our friends at Exclusive Books, who we love. We have reviews of books from just about every genre. We're not short of author interviews this month either. John Hanks chats to the Stewarts about their non-fiction work on the primates, and Philip Todrus interviews Derek Frost about his living and loving in the age of AIDS. Interestingly, Frost has a long-term association with Cape Town specifically and South Africa in general. He and his husband of 45 years, Jeremy Norman, founded AIDS Arc, a charitable trust, in 2002 as a response to the AIDS crisis. In 2002, thousands of people in the developing world were still dying of AIDS due to unavailability and cost of ARV treatment. AIDS Arc was set up to address that urgent need, and 20 years later, they continue to fight this good fight. Esafeni Daycare Center in Nyanga for children affected by AIDS is one example of the incredible work supported by AIDS Arc and the author of this book, Derek Frost. Let's hear what he has to say about his work and this remarkable book.
Living and Loving in the Age of AIDS is written by Derek Frost. It is published by Watkin Books and distributed by Penguin Random. What made you write the book? I think that's a good starting point.
I wrote the book because there's a very important story still to be told, and it's a story which I felt particularly well placed to contribute to. The story is well described by the title of my memoir, Living and Loving in the Age of AIDS, with emphasis on living and loving. To better describe my contribution to the telling of this story, perhaps you'd allow me to read two beautiful comments from amongst the very many I've received from those who've already read my memoir.
Please do, yes.
The first is from a wonderful lady called Beth Kanji Goldring, who's a Buddhist nun who I met in Cambodia in 2014, and with whom we still work through the charity we founded called AIDS Arc. And she said, "This memoir is not only a love letter to Jay, who is my husband, as vital as that is, but a love letter to the whole world, to art in all its forms, to nature, to exuberance, and to everyone the author speaks of. Beautifully written, often deeply poetic, filled with so much deep appreciation in spite of the hardship and pain, abounding in generosity, of material certainly, but even more of spirit, compassion, and profoundly joyous."
That's a terrific summary, but also I think what we would need to emphasize is we're living through another pandemic. Mm-hmm. And what you tell us about, you go back to the early 80s, in fact, late 70s, and you start with when it all started. And the focus it had and the vision of gender issues was very different from what we are experiencing today. So I think that story is a very important story that you tell.
Yeah, it is an important story. I mean, we were right in the middle of the gay experience or the gay celebration that followed the liberation of homosexuality from, being a criminal offence, in that we started two very major nightclubs in London, and one, the second, place called Heaven, practically any gay person in the world has been to, frankly. And it was very, very important during that period of celebration. We also lived for a period of time in Florida, where was one of the places where AIDS arrived, and we were there at the time. And there was this incredibly kind of cruel event that happened, was that in the middle of this celebration, this huge gay celebration, AIDS arrived and focused itself, sadly, on gay people.
In a very negative way, and sort of take one back a step or three. We now move forward into the current day, and I think it's very important the way you tell the story can now change quite dramatically, but we still are dealing with the after effects. And I think you mentioned AIDS Arc. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and the involvement of that, and also how you came to South Africa?
Yeah, sure. Well, AIDS Arc is the second AIDS-related charity we started. The first we started in the mid-'80s. Then in early 90, Jay, my husband, became infected with HIV at a time when the drugs weren't available, and so basically it was a death sentence. He managed to survive what we describe as our war up until the period of 97, when effective medication became available, and he survived. On the back of that, we then realized that we were in a very good position to help other people stay alive by raising fairly modest sums of money, putting that amount of money into the hands of doctors, and thus making the same drugs that were keeping Jeremy alive, other people alive who couldn't access those drugs. And we started that work in Cape Town. We'd been to Cape Town on many occasions. We knew about the history of the AIDS epidemic in South Africa and how, appalling it was, and the fact that drugs were not available to so many people. And we met a number of doctors here, and we started our second charity called AIDS Arc, and that ultimately worked in many countries across the world. And I'm pleased to say it has helped save very, very many people's lives.
You start by saying you wanted to read another extract. Could we ask you to do that?
Yes. Well, the other really was on the subject of love, because, I would hate for people to feel that my book was a very gloomy subject all about AIDS. AIDS is obviously very central to it, but what another very lovely person said, an interesting man who has recently been appointed UK government's LGBT business champion. And he says, kindly, perhaps one of the most important love letters I have ever read. Tells a story of living life to the full and giving back so much. The author's passion for life comes through on every page.
Well, I think that's a very good point, and I would encourage people to read a book that puts things in perspective in a very strong and powerful way. We're speaking to Derek Frost, the author of Living and Loving in the Age of AIDS.
Living and Loving in the Age of AIDS by Derek Frost is published by Watkins Books London and distributed by Penguin Random House. So should it take your fancy, it's available at Exclusive Books.